Passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Franchise Euphoria, the podcast to help people succeed in franchising. Have you ever thought about what it takes to be a great leader? Have you ever wondered whether or not you are a good leader? Well, today I am thrilled to have on the show Richard Rierson to talk about that and much, much more. Richard is currently a commercial pilot and certified John Maxwell leadership speaker, trainer, and coach. Richard is also the host of the popular podcast Dose of Leadership, where he interviews today's relevant leaders and leadership experts. Richard's previous positions include Vice President of Operations and Vice President of Brand Communication for Value Place Hotels, Director of New Product Development and Director of International Operations for the Hayes Company, and Boeing 727 Flight Engineer for American Airlines. Richard also served 10 years active duty as an officer in the United States Marine Corps, and has served the last 10 years part-time with the Kansas Air National Guard and Air Force Reserve. He has accumulated over 4,000 flight hours as an aircraft commander in the Lockheed KC-130, Boeing KC-135, CRJ-200, and as a military instructor pilot in the Cessna T-37. Richard is a born and bred Wichita, Kansas native and received his BS of Computer Science from Wichita State University in 1991. He is also a 2007 recipient of the Wichita Business Journal's annual 40 Under 40 Award. He currently resides in Andale, Kansas with his wife of 20 years and 4 daughters ages 16, 14, 10, and 8. Wow, that is one heck of a bio. I am so thrilled to have you on the show today, Richard. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Well, Josh, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk about leadership and about your podcast. Congratulations for taking a leap forward, and I think you're creating a unique podcast for a unique niche. So, congratulations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. As you know, it's a work in progress, and really just trying to help people out there who are looking to get into franchising. You know, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of bad information, and there's a lot of things that people really need to know about franchising. And you have some experience in franchising, but you also have a tremendous amount of experience in leadership. And I think you're going to have a tremendous amount to offer to my audience in terms of things that they can look for to become a better leader, or what leadership is all about. But first, I'd just love to hear about your tremendously interesting history. And I'd like to first say as well, thank you so much for your service to our country.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it was, again, a lot of it, my leadership philosophy certainly was forged during my time in my experience in the Marine Corps as being an officer and a pilot. And I didn't really realize how important or impactful the Marine Corps was to me until I was kind of forced into the civilian sector. And I was, like I said, 10 years active duty in the Marine Corps and was a pilot and loved it. But I got hired by American Airlines in June of 2001 and thought I had my dream job. I was so excited. I finished my training on September 8th, 2001, and I had 3 days off. And September 11th was actually my first official day as a fully checked out pilot or flight engineer for the Boeing 727.
Really? Wow.
September 11th was my first official day, and I flew 6 times after that and furloughed October 1st and kind of thrust into this corporate arena, and I had to find a job, and I got a job as a shipping supervisor at a company here in Wichita. And that's when it kind of hit me that the things I took for granted, flying multi-crew aircraft and being around that kind of culture of leadership in the Marine Corps, just didn't necessarily equate all the time in the civilian community. And I remember sitting there these people had been shipping and receiving, forklift drivers. They were looking at me with skepticism, like, who is this guy? Doesn't know anything about shipping and receiving. And I really didn't. And I remember asking the kind of shift leads, all right, what do you guys need? And they're like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you guys are the experts. I'm not. You just tell me what you need, and I'm here to, make sure that happens so you can be the most successful shipping guys that we can be. And this guy who drove a forklift, he'd been doing shipping, receiving, pretty much the same type of work for about 18 years. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, no one's ever said that to us before. And that really shocked me. But then I noticed as I kind of progressed throughout corporate America that it was true. I mean, it's just there's a lot of lack of common sense leadership existing everywhere. And I think leadership is central to all aspects of our lives, not just business, but personal life as well. But so that's kind of how it all started anyway, at least this passion about leadership. And that eventually led to I just kept getting different opportunities and promotions, not because I'm the sharpest knife in the drawer, but just because I kept just applying common sense. In some cases, I worked myself out of a job because I brought somebody on who was smarter and better than me at it. And that, to me, that's what I think it's all about.
Well, it's interesting because when I think about a leader or leadership, the very first thing I think about is the military. I think it's, the classic, for a lot of people, to be the classic definition of where, leaders are made or born or found. I'm curious, first, what drove you to go to the military? I mean, was it something that you always wanted to do? And then second, do you think there's something to that? Do you think that leaders, that more people who are drawn to the military are maybe more naturally inclined to be great leaders?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if people who are drawn towards the military are naturally inclined to be great leaders, because I certainly saw bad leadership in the Marine Corps and in the military. But I think if I think back to my experience, and a lot of people that I know, when we get asked the question, well, why did you join the military? Why did you join the Marine Corps in particular? And I think almost to the letter, almost 100% of the time, if you really got down to it in the conversations, some point in the conversation, somebody would say, I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. Certainly the patriotism thing comes up, and the service of doing the country, and a lot of it was like, I'd want to fly airplanes. I thought about being a pilot and found out it was possible, and I thought, hey, this would be great, and it was just kind of a reacting thing. This would be kind of a cool thing to do. Now, obviously, as I got into it, I didn't really realize it. Like I said, when you're in it, you're not aware of it until you're away from it. You're more aware of it when you're away from it. But particularly the Marine Corps is that they for 230 some years, they've been developing this culture of leadership. It's all about the leadership. And the one thing that's unique, particularly about the Marine Corps, is that they push the leadership accountability and responsibility down to the absolute lowest level. And they do that because they live in a very chaotic environment. It demands decentralized decision making. So therefore, they teach everybody to think and act like a leader. And that, I think, is a great philosophy that can apply to everybody's life. And so, yeah, for me, I got in because I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. I wanted to do something great. I wanted to see the world, all those things. And as I got into it, I started developing this kind of passion for leadership. And so I don't know if it's because I'm more inclined to, because I didn't consider myself a natural leader, and I don't. But those are some myths that I think we all believe. I think everybody, if they want and have the desire to be a leader, can be a leader. In fact, we're obligated to be leaders.
Now, was there somebody in the military that had a particular strong impact on you that kind of led you to, wow, I'm really kind of fascinated by leadership, or this is something that I want to do? Was it there where you found the calling to spend your time, spend your life developing other leaders?
Yeah, I think when I think back on that, I look back and you ran into some just remarkable individuals. And the one that really stood out early on, we all had to go to the 6-month infantry school. And he was a colonel at the time, but General Peter Pace, I don't know if you ever heard of him or not, but he was on the Joint Chiefs years ago. But he was a colonel then at the time. And he came and spoke to us, and he spoke to us about his time and experience as a Vietnam platoon commander. And I remember going in thinking early on, I was like, can I be a leader? And I thought about it, and I was thinking I had to be something that I really wasn't naturally. I thought that to be a leader, you had to be this larger-than-life charismatic figure, right? You had to walk into a room and kind of everybody would follow you through the gates of hell. And when I saw Peter Pace, it was the first time that when he was talking, he was very quiet. He didn't have this larger-than-life personality. He's really skinny. But he had a presence about him. And the presence wasn't, the typical square jaw, 6'4" booming voice. Here was this guy that was kind of skinny, kind of quiet, kind of hard to hear sometimes. But when he started talking about his people, that particularly in his platoon back then, and to see him get choked up and to see the love that was emanating from him, that was the first time it hit me that, wow, leadership is about love. And when you talk to a lot of people, when they think about the Marine Corps and everybody else, you wouldn't think that. But I can tell you that I've met more people who understand the concept of love and taking care of other people and what it's about. You take care of them, they'll take care of you. That whole mentality, that's when it really started getting ingrained in me. And I think it's unique. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about leadership, that it is about love, that it is about taking care of other people, that it is completely unselfish. And so that was the first leader I saw that kind of emanated that. To see a man who had all these, great war record of the chest full of medals, and here he was being completely vulnerable and almost in tears, thinking about the love that he had for these others. That to me was tremendously powerful.
Well, it's interesting because I know, at least for myself, and I'm sure a lot of people out there, that when you think of a leader and you think of somebody, having that presence, as you said, is seemingly a must to be a leader. But I think where there's some myths in leadership, and I've certainly fallen prey, is, historically, I've always thought, well, the presence that great leaders draw upon is something where they're, gregarious, or they're this, or they're that, or they're. But what it really comes down to, it seems like, is they're so comfortable with themselves, and they're authentic in their communications and their relationships with others, and that in and of itself is powerful.
Yes. Yeah, you hit it on the head. I mean, authenticity and vulnerability to me are the secret sauce to leadership. And that's something that you hear me talk about a lot on my podcast and when I do my coaching. You're right. There's great strength. A lot of people think they equate vulnerability with weakness. And I'm not saying you need to be, you can, there's great strength in being vulnerable, being completely 100% present, of not wearing a mask, and I think there's a lot of that going on. And I'm with you. I mean, when I got off the bus at Officer Candidate School, I remember the drill instructor yelling at me and said, boy, you better start generating some command presence because you have none. And when I heard that word command presence, I was thinking, okay, yeah, I got to be the John Wayne character. And it's a myth. And to me, command presence or leadership presence is all about, a presence of being calm, of being consistent, of being confident, most importantly, I think being courageous. And I think those are four things that people can learn to do. You can dedicate your life to learn how to be more calm, to be more consistent, to be confident, to be courageous, because a lot of those are choices. Too often, though, people focus on being charismatic, and that is what you were just alluding to, and that is what gets people into trouble. And that's, and it's interesting when you see a group get together. I don't care if it's, you're getting for your kids, the parents are getting together for the kids' softball team or baseball team or basketball team, and someone needs to be in charge of getting the snacks. And you see the natural kind of leader kind of take over. Or at work where they break people into groups. Okay, we got to get this project done. And so people started gravitating to that kind of charismatic, gregarious leader that we all, and that's natural, right? But a lot of times, more often than not, I've seen when the pressure comes on, when the heat really gets on, it's sometimes, not always, but a lot of times that initial gregarious leader tends to break under the pressure. I've seen that more often than not. I don't know if you've seen that in your career as well, but I've seen that so many times.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think what it comes down to is that you can only fake it for so long, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and this is what's kind of fascinating to me, and I'd love to get your point on this as well. Is, you've been in a lot of leadership positions, and it would seem to me that in each position that you hold, it calls for different qualities, and I think there's a challenge and really a skill that can be developed where you maintain your true character, you maintain your authenticity, but you do it in a way that works within the demands and responsibilities of your position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, one of the mistakes I've made in the past, and I've made quite a few, is thinking that there's kind of one leadership philosophy. Certainly my strength and what I purport and what I think works best is more of a collaborative approach to leadership. I think the command and control type of leadership is not effective. I don't think it's ever really been that effective. I mean, some people historically have said that was the way it used to be, and we've kind of migrated, and maybe somewhat yes. But I think that always, the type of leadership that always works is if you can push decentralized decision making to every level and get people to make decisions in your absence. I mean, that's when the creativity, that's when the strength, that's when the speed, and that's when the kind of, the collaborative or just the leadership that just knocks it out of the park. I agree with that. But there are times when you have to step into, a more command and control approach. The situation may dictate. And I think that's what's important for leaders to understand, is that you have to be able to play to your greatest strength, but you have to be willing to kind of jump into different roles at different times that you may not be comfortable in. I'm not as comfortable in the command and control style, but there are times like I said, in a crisis situation, maybe that you just need to make a decision. You don't have time. Just like I equate it to like flying a multi-crew aircraft. If I have something that's about ready to happen and the wing's about to burn off, I'm not going to bring the whole crew in there and ask for a consensus. There are just certain things that have to get taken care of right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm fascinated by it because I think it's a struggle for a lot of people as they search and they try to find, as business owners, as franchise owners, as leaders in their own lives, trying to find that balance between doing things that are completely comfortable to them versus doing things that are comfortable to them but also more relatable or having a more positive impact on their role as a leader. So in other words, how do you then, if your nature is not to be that commanding dictatorial type presence, but we know that a lot of times leadership roles call for that, how do you do that and maintain that connection with your people and maintain that authenticity that you've talked about and we know is so important?
Well, leadership is so easy to understand when you really break it down to it, but it's so difficult, and it's difficult for a whole host of reasons. And I think the one of the reason it's so difficult is that you're getting to that point is a lot of times leaders think they have to be the one with all the answers. And I think, first and foremost, you have to step away from that mindset that as the leader, you have to have all the answers, all the solutions. And the whole part of being authentic and vulnerable is being completely comfortable with who you are, be proud of who you are, be proud of your weirdness. I think we're all weird, and just relish that. The key is to especially when you're getting into business and everything else or teams, is you cannot be the guy or the gal with all the answers. You have to surround yourself with people who are just as good, if not better than you. And that's where the challenging part of leadership comes in, because what a lot of leaders think they need to do is I need to get a whole bunch of followers, and I need to get a whole bunch of followers, and that is to some degree and extent a great way to lead on the short term, I think, however. But if you're running a business, you're doing something long term or something sustainable, at some point as a leader, you're going to have to start shifting your mindset, and you're going to have to start developing leaders, not developing followers, but developing other leaders. And this is where it gets difficult, because you have to have people that are, one, just like you, like I said, smarter or even better than you, They have to be kind of independent. They have to be, I don't like coloring in the lines. And that's where the kind of herding of the cats. And how do you get those like-minded individuals in the same room and get them going in the same direction? And that's where the real challenge of leadership starts to happen. But that's where the real growth in sustainable companies or sustainable results happen, because you start developing other leaders. It's developing people to take your job. It's developing people to let go. It's developing people to make decisions in your absence. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, but that's where the real growth comes. And
I mean, essentially, it sounds like it's developing other people to be the best that they can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think and here's going back to that kind of follower piece. I mean, it feels great. And I've been guilty of this. I mean, I've done this. I've gone into leadership positions and I'm like, look at all these people that are following me. Some were great and some didn't follow me so much. And so I focused all attention on those followers. And what I found, what I was doing, and it felt good. It felt because I felt needed, and it stroked my ego and made me feel good, made me feel right. Yeah. These people need me. I need to be there. But it's not sustainable forever, because you're going to get burned out, because what you're doing is you're spending 80% of your energy on the weakest part of your team. And you're neglecting the true stars, the true performers, the people that could take your job. And once I started shifting, and I've seen this, where I shifted on the same team and I started focusing my attention on star performers. I brought in people that were smarter than me, that I knew could do the job better than me. I developed them. And what happened was everybody, what's the old saying? Rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yep.
And so here I was spending all my energy on the bottom 20%, or at least 80% of my energy on them. And it was just fruitless, you know. But then when I started spending my 80% on the top 20%, and bringing in people, everybody else started seeing that, and the whole organization, the whole team started to blossom. And so that was kind of an aha moment for me. And like, that's kind of the key. But it's hard. It's hard to find people that are willing to do that, to develop them. It's hard to keep them, because once they started being successful, they start getting other opportunities, right? And you lose them sometimes, and you have to be prepared for that. It's hard to get people with those independent minds going in the same direction. It's difficult.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, because I on a daily basis, I see and I talk to people who own small businesses, and their lifelong dream was, I'm going to own my own business. I'm going to build my own future. I'm going to set things up the way I want to. And I love that. I love helping people do that. But so often people fall into the trap. I've fallen into the trap myself, is in that you end up working in your business versus on your business, as the famous, E-Myth Revisited book would tell you. You end up being the person that's doing everything because it's just, too hard to train somebody, or
that's
they
right.
just don't get it, or they don't know how to do it. And I think it's up there with the biggest struggles that small business owners have. And I think, it's always going to be there. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a set solution to it. But I mean, do you recommend that a small business owner, and obviously every case is different, but do you recommend that you find somebody else who's similar to you and then slowly turn the reins over to them for them to hire? Or what's the best way to get started to become that leader, so that you as the business owner can do less, and not less in the sense of working less, but just working differently? As I think as a business owner, people need to be the visionaries. They need to drive the vision for the business and the growth, and have other people in there to deal with the day-to-day type of operations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, every situation's different, and sometimes financial means dictate you can't bring on a staff to, or an inner circle necessarily that's, can help you directly within the business. But I will say this, that I think that, the biggest mistake I think small business owners can make, I struggle with this now as I try to, build my own successful business. I mean, at some point you have to do things yourself. You have to create the website. You have to do the marketing. You have to do the selling. You have to do all those things sometimes. I'm not saying that you go into a business and have the staff. It just may not be feasible at times. But at the same time, I think as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, it's all about relationships in any way. I mean, leadership is all about that. You have to understand that you cannot do this by yourself. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you're an entrepreneur or not an entrepreneur. You cannot successfully get through this by yourself. And so what I mean by that is you have to develop an inner circle. You have to surround yourself by people who are like-minded like you. Doesn't mean that they necessarily agree with you. In fact, I don't encourage that. I want people who maybe opposed to you politically or see business differently. Sometimes those are the best people to have within your inner circle. But at some point, you need to develop that inner circle from the get-go, from the very beginning of that business. If you don't, because that can morph and transform into relationships that people may eventually come into the business. But I think, yeah, you have to develop an inner circle. You have to develop people a sounding board. You have to develop accountability partners. You have to develop all those things no matter what type of business you're doing. I strongly believe that. And the more that you can surround yourself with people who are like-minded, I don't mean necessarily agree with you, but like-minded, who have the same ideas, the same passions, who are bought into your vision, I think that's the only way that you can successfully grow a business, in my opinion.
Yeah, you just took the words out of my mouth. I mean, I recently had lunch with a very successful local entrepreneur who's become a friend and a client, and we were talking, and he was asking me about my practice and my business, and I was making the comment that I learned a very valuable lesson, that I hired a virtual assistant
right.
through a company, and I realize now, I didn't realize it then, I hired them for the purpose of them coming in and helping me create systems. And what I realized after several months of using them is you have to have the systems first, and then have them come in and work within your system, which ties into buying into the vision. You have to know what your vision is. You
right.
have to know where you're going. And that's what he had said to me. He said, when you're hiring somebody, he said, it's very, very difficult. But a lot of people make the mistake of hiring for the job.
Yeah.
And you'd never want to hire for the job. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, look, Josh, he's like, you don't know what you really want this person to do. But what you do know is what your vision is. And so what you're hiring them, you want to hire somebody who buys into your vision and who understands that they may be doing this on this day and that on that day. But what they buy into is where you're going, not where you're at.
No, that's great advice, and I love that. And I think that it ties into, and this is something that people have told me, and I find myself, when I find myself getting wrapped around the axle, like, well, what's the best landing page that I can have, or why is my SEO optimized? What's the best way to get leads, and which are all important. But every now and when you find yourself doing that, you can almost, how do I say this? The tactics of the business can they can blind you to, and they take your eye off the big purpose and the big why.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that with anybody that's in business and franchising and everything else, always remember what your big purpose and your big why is, and the rest of the stuff will, they say, fall into place. I mean, sometimes you still have to work. You just can't just sit there and talk all day about your big purpose and your big why, and then sit back and let everything fall. Action has to come into play. But I think sometimes we lose sight. We get bogged down and mired down by the tactics instead of focusing on the vision. And that's what leaders do. And that's a leadership mindset. I mean, that's the whole reason why you have leaders. I mean, management is the efficiency and the tactics and the action, but the leadership is buying people into the big purpose and the why. This is why we are doing this.
One of the best books I've read in a long time is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've read that.
I know who Simon is though, but yeah, I haven't read that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, and that is, and his point, and I think it's so true, and so many people start with how and what, but
Yep.
the great businesses and the effective people and the effective leaders and communicators start with why, because at the end of the day, people buy why you do something as opposed to what and how you're doing. The what and how is important, but people ultimately need to know. And he relates it to Apple and several other very, very successful companies. And it sounds so simple. It's powerful though. And
That is powerful.
and so many people don't do it. I mean, after I read that book, I started really paying attention to advertisements and to, as you go to people's websites and you look around and you go, they're all telling me what they do and they're telling me how they do it, but they're not giving me a reason to buy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful insight and advice.
I try to, and I certainly fall in that trap even on a day-to-day basis, but I have a handful of examples where I've just changed the language, and it's a leadership language, and I encourage people to sit back and just kind of observe and watch whatever happens at work or whatever you're trying to doing or whatever task you're trying to, or solution you're trying to solve for, where you're at in your business or your franchise. I mean, watch people how they interact, and all they're doing is focusing on the tactics. And you'll hear people start saying, we can't do it because of this, we can't do that because we can't do it because of this. If somebody comes in and poses the question, this is what I see, you're faced with a challenge, a problem, and that's every day, an opportunity. And if the language of the leadership is, they start saying, I see a time when we can do X. I foresee that, this is what I really would like us to be able to do, to someday walk into here and do X, Y, and Z. Wouldn't that be great? Just asking those type of questions. And you'll be amazed at the mileage you can get from that. And if you consistently do that, you will be blown out of the water with the solutions that people come up with. So often I've gone and been in the leadership positions and I've said, well, this is what we have to do and this is my vision and here's the tactics, and I laid everything out, and they've been colossal failures and flops.
Well, it's like I mean, you're tying into, it's like you had Dane Maxwell on your program from the foundation, and I mean, he's got his whole idea extraction, and that is, people think they all have to come up with the ideas, and what they really need to do is find out what the problems are, and then come up with the solutions, and that's your business, and that's really what you're doing.
Well, and you're exactly right, and it's the same with anything. It's just like if I'm coaching somebody in leadership or coaching. That's a lot of the myths. What people think on coaching is that coaching have all the answers. Coaches don't have all the answers. The client has the answers already. But it's the idea of extracting that and getting it out of them, and asking those open-ended questions.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's fascinating. I mean, my wife is a certified life coach and has been for a number of years, and so much so that I didn't even know what it was when she became certified. She has a master's degree that she's also a certified life coach, and now of course there's life coaches everywhere. But I remember asking her, "What's this all about?" And she says, "It's basically asking a lot of questions."
Yeah, I mean it's extractive. I've seen it. I've seen the exercise going through my coaching training, and they would, I don't know how to juggle, and they would make us, how do you juggle 3 balls, right, in 3 little bean bags, and you'd watch people and and you say, okay, we'll teach this person to juggle 3 bean bags, and you just see, like a lot of telling and a lot of, and it was never successful. But then when the coach turned around and just was observing, and then someone would try, and then you'd see something successful and say, well, how did you feel about that? What was different with that? And you saw the wheel spinning on the person trying to juggle. It was amazing how just by doing that, and then next thing you know, they're starting to get it, And so,
yeah,
I know
it's fascinating.
And that's the job of the leader. That's what I meant when I said that you don't think you have to have all the answers. You don't.
There's I've been listening to a lot of books through Audible, audible.com, and they're not a sponsor of my program. I just like what they do, and I like listening to books. And one of the books I'm listening to right now is called Start by John Acuff. And he had the other day when I was listening to it, he had a tremendous thing he said in there, which was, a big mistake that people make is they think they have to be interesting when really all they have to be is interested.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the hard about being vulnerable, is being completely present in the moment and not focused on yourself, but focused on them, especially when you're talking about leadership. I mean, it is simple to understand, and we could talk for hours about why we don't. A lot of it goes with, again, back to our ego and our limiting beliefs. And I struggle with this on a daily. We all do. And these are just things that you have to remind yourself, that you have to be less focused on yourself and more focused on them. It's not about you. It's about them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, and tell me a little bit. You have some experience in franchising, right? Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah, I worked for the hotel company, and I started with the hotel company as a land entitlement guy. So basically, I would take the real estate guy would get a land under contract, and once it was under contract, I would take it through the whole process, dealing with the civil engineers, the city council, the due diligence, if you will, to get it to closing. And so it was a big project management job. But then I moved into the vice president of brand communication, and so that's when I really got into the franchising side, and really for the first time what it was like to be the franchisor and deal with the franchisee. I put on franchise conferences. I would make sure that they were understanding the brand and dealing with that. And then I became the vice president of operations for a short time there too. Again, dealing with franchisees from sometimes we had our own company properties that we would manage, but a franchisee, if they wanted to, could pay us and we would manage the properties for them. So I dealt with a lot of franchisees, saw a lot of frustrations and successes and failures of behind the scenes of what it was like with dealing with a franchisee coming into the franchise system for the first time. And I saw things that worked and things that didn't work so well. So yeah.
Well, if you could maybe highlight on one or two. I mean, I think that would be really helpful for the audience. Is what was the top one or two things that you consistently saw that a franchise newbie coming in found frustrating? Maybe something that they didn't anticipate, but something that when they got into the system, thought, "Man, I wish I had known this," or I hadn't even thought about this.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting diversity of individuals that came in, but most of them were they were very successful in some previous life doing something else. Some were in franchises, some had owned previous things. A lot of them most of them were self-made, and they had they'd ran successful companies. They were successful and had some money, and they wanted to take a step further. So it was interesting when they got in, especially the ones that were never into franchising for the first time. They were all entrepreneurial, self-made. Some had egos, some were more humble than others. But probably the biggest thing I saw was when they got into the franchise system, what it exactly meant, the understanding of the mindset of what it means to be part of a franchise. And the best analogy, and when people started to get it, was when we would explain to them, say, look, we appreciate, so for example, we would get a franchise come in and they're like, hey, I got all these great ideas, and some of them were good and some of them weren't so good, and some of them were good but they didn't fit with the brand, right? And so, for example, a simple example, we had a franchisee, very outgoing, very successful businessman in his own right, and he came in and he wanted to start introducing into the hotel lobby free coffee and donuts. Sounds good. Sounds like a good way to attract customers and this and that. However, it detracted from the brand overall. Now, I'll bore you with all the details, but if you looked at it, it detracted. This isn't what we want. We don't want to give away free breakfasts. We don't want to give away coffee. We don't want to give donuts. And I remember it was a big debate, a big hullabaloo. And eventually we showed them how it didn't fit with the brand, and if we didn't have that, And so that was probably, I see that time and time again, and you would see resistance, like, well, this is my hotel, I'm running it, I should be able to do whatever I want. Hold on a second. You're paying, even though you are an entrepreneur, you got an entrepreneurial mindset, you're paying a franchise the right to use their brand. It's just like a driver's license when you go.
Well, and I think what it really gets down to, and I write about this in my blog, and I, because I see it all the time, is that people don't really understand the business model when they get into a franchise.
Right.
They think they understand. They think they know what they're buying, but they don't really understand how it all works. And I think that kind of ties into that in terms of, well, yeah, that may be a great idea, but it doesn't work with the big picture for this brand because of X, Y, and Z.
Right. Well, and the perfect example is McDonald's, right? You know exactly what you get, and I'm not here to talk and discuss about McDonald's quality of food. We all know where it's at, but we know if you're driving by and you know what a Quarter Pounder tastes like, you know what it tastes like, you know what the fries taste like, and McDonald's does, and all fast food chains do. They go out of their way to make sure that French fry that you get in Little Rock, Arkansas is going to taste the same in Shanghai, China. That's the goal anyway. And that's an understanding, I think, the entrepreneur, the free thinking mindset, the importance of that, why that is important for that brand image. And if you start introducing little things like coffee and donuts, then there's not the consistency in the brand. And so I think a lot of franchisees coming in with that entrepreneur mindset need to understand that when they get into that business model, that you can't, just because your brother owns a fry making, make the fries cheaper and better, or has a different oil that's going to save you a lot on your bottom line, doesn't mean it's the smartest thing or the best thing to do. Introduce it. Now, having said that, the franchisor has a leadership responsibility too, that this new oil or this new fry machine may be the best thing since sliced bread, and it may help the business. So they need to be open to those ideas. And so that's the challenging thing, I think, for franchising, is that it's a mix of entrepreneurship with limits. It's like, do you got to color within the lines? Yes. But at the same time, I want to encourage you to, if you want to color outside of the lines, you need to understand that there's a process and mechanism for doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that, the best franchise systems that I've seen are the ones that certainly have their systems and processes down. Right. Because I think that's what really attracts people to franchising, is that they don't have to go through the learning curve per se.
Exactly.
They're the systems. But the best franchises also understand that things need to be tweaked over time. And
that's right.
People who run these businesses and are in them and on a daily basis will see certain things. So they have to be open to suggestions. I think that's there's a guy, Bob Pervin, who started the Association for Franchise and Dealers out of California, has been a franchise attorney for 45 years. Great guy. And he's huge on the power of associations for franchisees, because that's really, especially in larger franchises, that's really where they can develop a voice, by having multiple franchisee owner operators banding together through associations where they can make suggestions and whatnot.
Yes.
And I think there's power in that. But
absolutely, yeah.
But you're exactly right. I mean, it all comes, essentially it comes back down to understanding the model and understanding who you are as a franchise owner, because some people just need to do it themselves. I mean, if you really break it down, the true entrepreneur is the person who started the franchise.
Right.
You're an entrepreneur if you're buying a franchise, because you are buying a business, and make no mistake about it, you have to run a business, and business is local, and you have to be able to run it and lead it and manage people and do those things. But I think there's different levels of entrepreneurship. I think there's people who are somewhat risk averse but still entrepreneurial, and then there's other people who have more of an appetite for risk. And have a nagging sensation to always reinvent the wheel, always come up with something new, and that's fantastic. I mean, that's the engine that keeps our country going.
Yeah.
And I think understanding where you as a business owner, as a person, fall into that equation is huge, is key to success.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's I don't know. I think the more that people understand going into a franchise model, that you have to understand that you are giving up some of your entrepreneurial freedoms, for the right, because you're getting a package deal, you're getting business processes in place in theory, right? But at the same time, feel free to me, I always said it this way: it's not your right to challenge, it's your obligation. And I agree that with every aspect. It's your obligation as the franchisee to challenge the franchisor. And the franchisor has the obligation to be receptive to that. Everybody treats everybody with respect, to tolerate disrespect from no one. But at the same time, that is, I think, just be prepared that you're buying the rights to use their brand. And that was probably the biggest mistake that I noticed new franchisees weren't prepared for.
That's great. Well, I feel like I could speak to you for hours and hours and hours. And definitely before we go, though, I want to get into the John Maxwell leadership program that you're now certified in as a speaker, trainer, and a coach. And I'd like for you to take a couple minutes, Richard, and just kind of tell people about that, and then how you can help small business owners out there, or people who are just getting started in buying a franchise or buying a small business. What are the things that you can do to help them?
Oh, yeah, great. I've been a huge fan of John Maxwell for years. I came across him probably 20 years ago and picked up the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. It's a great primer. It's a great leadership Bible for anybody who's interested in leadership. And so when the opportunity came about 2 years ago, he started opening up the opportunity to train leaders and coaches. And I said, why not? And it's the same kind of like the franchise piece. It's similar in that mindset, except I don't.
Yeah.
I paid for the ability to get a license, and I've been personally trained by John Maxwell and his faculty to speak and to teach and to train, particularly to coach one-on-one and group coaching on leadership. And so what I do is I run masterminds to give people an idea. I have done some masterminds for free. I am doing a paid mastermind also. In fact, I'm starting a new one on the 21st of September, the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth with Maxwell. Maxwell's coming out with a new book coming out on October 15th, or 10th rather. And there's going to be a webinar where he's actually going to teach the first chapter. And so I'm going to be a part of that. And then again, I coach people on taking people through the concepts of Maxwell and leadership. But again, Maxwell didn't invent these. Leadership is just universal, and he'd be the first to tell you that. And leadership is for everyone, and I think that's why I think Maxwell is so popular and tends to be so successful, is because he views it like I do, that leadership is accessible for everyone. It is for everyone, and it's a myth to think that leadership is just for the CEOs and the larger-than-life figures of the world. It's for the mom. It's for the dad. It's for the aunt and uncle. It's for the teacher. It's for everybody. Regardless of your position or title, leadership is central to all aspects of our lives. And you're only going to be, in anything in life, you're only going to be as successful as your ability to lead. So the better you are at a leader, the more successful you're going to be. And I think the more that people understand that your potential, your team, whatever you're trying to manage, be it your personal life, your family, your team, your organization, all of that is going to be capped. The results of that are going to be capped by your leadership ability. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that Maxwell teaches all of us, and I love to teach everybody, is how do you raise that leadership lid? And so what I do with my coaching, my training, my speaking is teach people how to raise their leadership lid. And when you do that, results are pretty amazing, both in your personal and your professional life. And so I'm available to coach one-on-one. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, but I do group coaching. I do speaking. I do all-day seminars. I do keynotes. I pretty much do everything that you can in the realm of leadership. And of course, you're a fan of the show, the Dose of Leadership podcast. You hear me talk about all these concepts with well-known people like Steve Forbes is probably the biggest name that I've got, but a lot of leadership gurus like Jim Kouzes, David Allen, Dan Rockwell, you name it. I'm passionate. I'm a leadership nut. And I can't use leadership freak because that's Dan Rockwell's.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's fantastic. I mean, your show has been incredible. Dose of Leadership. You and I, we've never actually met in person, but we've met through a mastermind group.
That's correct. That's right.
The Fire Nation Elite mastermind group that's just tremendous. That was kicked off by John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire, and I've just met so many interesting people. And it's fascinating. It definitely sounds like everything that you're speaking of with respect to the leadership skills that you teach are imperative for somebody who's going to start a business, not just from the standpoint of running the business. That's obvious, running the business and managing people, but also from the standpoint of how do you manage your life as well. And I think there's, from what you talked about, it sounds like you touch upon those things. How do you lead well in business and lead well in life?
Yeah, the biggest mistake, and I've made this, and it's still long work, as I've separated the two, and to the detriment of personal relationships and with the family, which I'm still trying to mend today. And so that's part of the reasons why I'm so passionate about what I do, is that it's all interrelated, it's all connected, and at the core of it, the catalyst to all of it is understanding how to be a good leader. And the earlier you recognize that, the more successful you're going to be in every endeavor. So I strongly believe that.
Well, that's great. And I got to tell you, when I started this podcast, I said, I want to keep my podcast each episode to about half an hour. And now we have blown that out of the water because the conversation has been so interesting. So I love it. But I definitely want to finish off with one final question to you, and that is, for that person out there who has not realized their dreams, maybe is stuck in a corporate job, but has always thought about owning a business, getting themselves out there, putting themselves out there where they can be in more control of their future, has yet to make that leap, but is really thinking about it. What is one thing that you would tell them, that would help them feel more confident in their leadership ability and their ability to lead people, that might help them make that final decision and go for it?
I think we've all been there. I think the more that, especially as I've interviewed some of these people on these podcasts, I think I've known this. It's been validated by talking to some very successful people. It's been validated by being in masterminds like Fire Nation Elite. It's been validated and just in my own personal life, is that at some point you just have to take action. And the everybody, regardless of whatever success bucket you put them in, you may look at them from the outside and say, wow, they're so successful. Aren't they so talented? Aren't they so lucky? It's not. The only thing that's different is they just said, they just decided to do something. And always remember what your big purpose, your big why is. And you may tell yourself, and you're going to tell yourself, that you can't do it. I don't have the time. I don't have the economic freedom to do it. And those are all excuses. And if the more that you can surround yourself by like-minded individuals, and that's what's so great about masterminds, is you will be called into action. So reflect on what your calling is. And it may seem impossible, but suspend the belief. The biggest thing I'd ask people to do is suspend the belief on how it's going to get done. Just know that it's going to get done. And the more that you start telling yourself that, and that mind shift, things will start to happen. Suspend the belief on how it's going to get done. Just know that it's going to get done.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous advice. I really think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. I mean, I think that people are just overcome with fear a lot of times. They can't see the end of the road. Well, nobody can see the end of the road. Or they think that somebody else is just, as you said, smarter, better, more knowledgeable. Something that I realized a few years back, because I used to have that same mindset too, but I realized as I started meeting more and more very successful people and started getting to know them, I started realizing that they're remarkably unremarkable. And that's not an insult. That's just, from a standpoint of they're just like everybody else. But what they had was they had the ability to not only make the decision to go for it, but to focus in and to just go after it. And that is, to me, I think that's just, if you can do that, you're about 70% there.
I agree. I mean, and that's my point when I said to the people that I've interviewed, and it's been so inspiring to me, is that they're just like you and me, and they do wake up. Steve Forbes wakes up with limiting beliefs and fearful about certain things. I mean, and that should be encouraging for everybody. And the only difference between him and you is the resiliency, the ability to bounce back from a setback. And that's the only difference. And the tenacity. So I think the tenacity and the confidence of understanding that, confidence doesn't mean that you always have to be right. It's just that you're not afraid to be wrong. And the earlier that you can understand that and change your mindset shift, you're putting yourself ahead of 98% of the population. And again, it's not about necessarily getting ahead, but it's about shifting your mindset so that you can be successful. And it's not so much about the financial and the economic freedom which we're all striving for, but it is more about the journey. And you'll be surprised at how rich and rewarding the journey is if you focus on the journey.
Well, that's great stuff. And thank you again, Richard, for your time. You've been very, very generous with it. And I'd love for you to finish the show off by just telling everybody where they can reach you or learn more about you.
Yeah, I'm easy to find. If you Google Richard Rierson, and it's Rierson, it looks like it's pronounced Rierson, but it is Rierson. And you can go to doseofleadership.com. That is where I host the podcast. I am revamping my personal website, richardrierson.com, which will have more information on my specific coaching and speaking abilities. But you can go there as well. So either way, you can find me. Twitter, at Dose of Leader. And then, of course, Facebook, there's a Facebook Dose of Leadership. I mean, so I'm easy to find, and I'm always excited to hear from people, and I look forward to connecting with folks.
Well, thank you again so much, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
All right, Josh, thanks for having me on the show. It was fun.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.